Welcome back. You're watching Today. Now, the media industry needs to transform. That's the view of the Media Development and Diversity Agency. It says more women need to advance into decision-making position, and this may require the industry to self-regulate. This is because many countries globally ignore women's perspectives and teach them not to ask questions or participate in public discourse. To unpack this further, we're joined this hour by the agency's acting CEO, Nomkhosi Peter. A very good afternoon to you, Nomkhosi, and thank you for joining us in studio. You and I were just talking off air earlier that a conversation as crucial as this one is not one that should be left exclusively for Women's Month. Your thoughts on the advancements that have been made in the collective of women in media over the last 30 years or so of democracy?
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. I think such a conversation cannot be had in isolation of the broader societal issues in relation to women. Women in media is but a microcosm of the reflection of broader society. So for us to confine this conversation to 1 month of the year, when women are the larger proportion of the population, is actually counterproductive.
And you find that, I don't know if it's entrenched in women, but it's still very difficult for a woman in any industry, in fact, to come forth and to put their views and their opinions forward in any situation. And I wonder how we try to change that kind of status quo or that mindset in the industry going forward.
Okay. Generally, women face a couple of what they refer to as isms. It's the issue of, well, there's the gender lens, there's the age lens, there's the race lens, and then there's the what is often referred to as the motherhood penalty. So in seeking to ensure that women are given greater representativity, both at a leadership level, but also that news coverage and media in general is representative of the issues that are responsive to the needs of women, is that women actually need to be leading the conversation themselves. So the report that was commissioned by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation actually found that women are grossly underrepresented in editorial positions, and that the net result of that is that the reporting in relation to issues underrepresents things of interest to women. So you've got to fix it at the level of the sector, you've got to fix it at the level of the organization in respect of women's representation in newsrooms, and you've then got to fix it at the level of leadership. So even when women are in newsrooms, are they in the right level of position to actually influence what the editorial agenda is?
And it's a terrible thing, because it's still that thing that's called the glass ceiling that so very strongly exists. I mean, I was at the BRICS summit last week, for example, and a lot of the business leaders that were there are still men mainly, you know, and women still sit on the periphery making notes and kind of just taking in what is said by other people about their livelihoods and their careers and their advancements in different industries. So you're saying that there needs to be a change, but how do we even begin with that? Because I think it needs to come from a policy level as well.
So I think, you know, there are certain policies that have given pronouncement around women's representation. If you look at the extent to which women should serve on boards, the extent to which women are represented in parliament, the issue of 50-50 parity has long been touted, but whether that is realized in practice is a different issue. I mean, we enjoy the enviable position of South Africa of having a representation of women in parliament that far surpasses the 50% mark, but you're still finding that we are passing laws that are not entirely in the best interests of the broader sector of our population, which is women. And it begs the question whether, even when afforded the opportunity as women, are we making pronouncements and pushing against the boundaries to ensure that we are given the voice, to ensure that we are making decisions and influencing those decisions in what is in our best interest. And many would argue that as women, actually, we sell ourselves short, because even when we are given the platform, we don't take it up and use it optimally to drive an agenda that is in our best interest.
I mean, with that, then, how important is the role of education from a young age or from a grassroots level to teach young women that it is okay to speak up and to take up a role should you be afforded that opportunity, the role of education at a grassroots level here?
I mean, what you're pointing out pointing out is the issue of women's empowerment.
Yes.
That it cannot be something that we begin when women are then brought into the workspace.
Yeah.
Women's empowerment should begin at a grassroots level in the education system, where we recognize the boy and the girl child as being equal, and we avoid the unintended consequences of focusing on one gender at the expense of another. We need to drive initiatives that empower young girls to speak up, to move into spaces that are predominantly male-dominated. You see it in, sports codes, in sporting codes, where certain sporting codes in schools are predominantly undertaken either by male children and girl children fall back. And you see it, and that actually plays its way through. If you look at the performance of more recently, Banyana, we don't have a professional women's league in relation to soccer, and yet soccer is a sport that is played in every township, and it starts at the school level. So there's just a glaring disconnect between what we are proposing and what we are arguing for, and how we actually see that coming into effect.
Might there be an issue of a lack of political will?
That's a difficult question, and almost putting me on the spot. I don't think that we are, for lack of a better word, lacking in the intent. Where we fall short is in execution. Because, as I mentioned earlier, we have the policies that empower us. We have the policies that recognize, the principles of equity, equality in relation to males and females. But where we come undone is in the implementation of those policies. And part of that is the fact that that implementation is not very often led by women themselves. So the policy is made enabling what is in the interest of women, but the implementation of that policy is actually then not given to someone who would take that through, being a woman themselves.
I do want to end on a positive note, because despite the many challenges, there have been some great strides that have been made. And just in your industry in particular, have you found that there has been a positive movement towards the empowerment of women throughout all the different stages or leadership stages within different organizations in the industry?
Every time you portray a woman in a leadership role, where you give her a voice, where you give her prominence, that is actually affirming not just the woman who is in that seat, but the ones who come behind her. And this speaks to the principle of sending that elevator back down. And so when you look at an organization like the MDDA, having an acting CEO who is a woman, having a board of directors that is 60% women, that really does speak to a change in the issue at hand. When you look at the projects that we fund, we particularly emphasize and give preference to projects that are women-led, projects that represent an element of diversity, both in terms of management and control, in terms of content that would speak to marginalized communities, in this case it would be women. So there is a shift, and however small the shift, we celebrate it, we appreciate it. More recently, we had the fortune of launching projects in KwaZulu-Natal that were funded in previous cycles by the MDDA. And all 4 of those actually are led by women. So you have community media stations, radio stations, where the station manager in both instances is a woman. And then you have 2 publications that are targeting youth and the LGBTQI community. And both those publications are edited by women. So it's not to say that the situation is all doom and gloom. There are pockets of excellence, and there are pockets of instances that give us hope. But those should not be the exception. We should get to a point where those become the norm, where we are talking less about pinpointing a station here, there, but rather we're saying, globally, if you evaluate the community media sector in South Africa, the representation of women has shifted from X to Y, and that's due to directed, deliberate intervention.
Thank you so much for our conversation this afternoon, and thank you for joining us in studio. That is the acting CEO at the Media Development and Diversity Agency, Nomkhosi Peter, speaking about the advancement of women across the country, and not just talking about it during Women's Month, but engaging this topic 365 days a year, because those challenges don't leave us after August.